I appreciate Andy calling out that I will be the accountant for the day. There, I'll spell out like how we're doing. Oh, this thing's really loving me. Okay, how we're going to do all the number crunching of the Stormwater Control Transfer Program. What is it? You'll notice in your binder that it's freshly minted from, I think it's March of 2016. Anne is very excited about that. I can see that. Because she wasn't called out enough in the last presentation. So it still is a good version from 2016, even though it's called draft. Don't be dismayed by that. These programs are something that Ecology does approve piece by piece. So it's a good starting point, but all of these, I'm going to talk about this later in the slides as well, is if a municipality is going to do this, it's going to be a conversation with Ecology. Andy had a conversation with us. And he said he is the one and only. That is still true. And we haven't heard anything coming up lately. I know that a lot of people are busy doing other things, maybe implementing LID and those kinds of things. So maybe at some point we'll see a larger interest in this, and I hope we do. I think it's a good program. It was, and now I have lots of words, and I'm going to read them a little bit to you. The idea behind this was to provide a way within the framework of the permit to have some flexibility and allow potential for different kinds of growth. And this slide does have a ton of words on them, but I'll just point out a couple of them. We had an early proposal that went to appeal, and in this guidance document, we've kind of looked at how that went, and we've addressed the concerns that were raised that were fair and equitable and it's science-based. That was some of it. I'm not going to be able to fully synthesize that full appeal. Like I said, some flexibility, and it sets an expectation of what we're going to want from you. It will be a conversation and discussion. This is a large program that's across your municipality, and it requires Ecology's approval. But we don't want you to start with going looking for rocks. We want to have you have some ideas of the things that we're looking for. And again, we are always looking to align with our larger visions of the Puget Sound ecosystem recovery targets. So there's things that people think this program is and things that they don't think it is, and I just want to try and get some sideboard so there's an understanding of what we're trying to do with this and what it's not trying to do. What it is trying to do is an alternative to doing the site and subdivision approach. Just you build something, you put something right there. We're looking to expand that, but we also don't want to go outside the permit, and we'll talk about that a little later. We're also trying to, in providing this flexibility, we want, people say triple bottom line, and I'm not that good with numbers, but there's a benefit we're trying to get from an environmental perspective. The idea is when you look at, a step of this is to look at your entire jurisdiction and figure out where is it that we're going to get lifts. And then you kind of look at, as development happens, rather than it being random throughout the city, you're going to focus those lifts where they can have the most impacts. So that's accelerating the environmental improvements. And this is already provision within the permits we have out and current now, and it was actually in a previous cycle as well. We've always allowed there to be what's called basin planning. And this falls in that realm. So things that it isn't, because everyone likes what isn't, we're not pulling out the permit. We're not changing our requirements. That's not what this is. Even though you're building something here, and at this location, you might be doing less than what you would do just in a straight application of the permit, you're going to do more over here, and we're going to see a bigger lift. And so that is still meeting the permit requirements. It is not a banking system like wetlands mitigation banking where you can just pay out. It's a very different structure than that. TMDLs are driving a lot of other states' watershed plannings, and that's not what is driving this. Like I said, we're looking for where there's environmental lift to happen, where it's most likely, and that doesn't always coincide with the TMDL. And it is not, the phase 1 communities, I'm sure there's a few of them here, have a structural stormwater control requirement or retrofitting plan. This isn't an alternative to that. This is supposed to be in addition. And we had some vocal opposition to make sure we didn't conflate those two. So we're trying in our guidance to be clear on that. We're not trying to replace that. This is something that's a little different. Okay. It's a beautiful document. It's 20 pages long. It's got a couple sections, and I'll just go over them ever so briefly so that we don't have to. I know that reading that whole document will really give you more richness than I can possibly deliver. So in general, we're just trying to talk about setting the ground rules with general principles and key elements, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. And we have specific guidelines that we don't want to be, we want to set you on the right path. So we talk a little bit about that in the first section. And then the second part is prioritizing. If you haven't heard me say it enough, it's about the environmental lift we're looking for, so that's a big part of the basis of prioritization. Where are we going to see those lifts? So you have to classify in your jurisdiction what the different levels you're going to see, what priorities you're going to set, and where you're going to focus efforts to start with. And then we have to, and this is in part to the court hearing I was talking about earlier, because court's always interesting, they were very clear that they wanted to have some science behind it, and monitoring is an important part of it. So we have to include that, and you know, Andy can talk a little bit about, and some of the rest of you can talk about some of the challenges of how do we clearly demonstrate lifts. Those are interesting questions, and we have to be honest that we don't know the answer to all those questions, but we're going to make an honest effort of doing some monitoring to make sure this works. And then, wow, accounting. Debits and credits and how we're going to do it. Okay, the principles. We want to make sure that we have full attainment of the water quality standards in all locations. We don't want to increase any impacts to the stormwater. And so this is really, this last part, this third one, where we're directing improvements to priority watersheds. Because development happens in a random fashion, or you know, maybe there's a hot development over here, people like the layouts, and then it starts to grow from there. You're not always going to have those coincide with where the environmental lift needs to happen. So independent of how development happens, we want to direct it to these priority watersheds where the environmental lift is most likely to occur. And science, priorities, and ecology is an approver of this. And you know, we worked with Redmond on theirs, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm glad that Redmond is implementing it. I'm excited they got to 4 years, and they're still excited about talking about it, so that's a good sign. And we're not going to relax any other requirements. This isn't something we're trading. That's not the point of this. It's a level trade between the permit requirements. Instead of doing it at the site and subdivision, we're saying you can do it across your watersheds. But it's not going to remove any other obligations that you might have. Okay. So Andy touched on this briefly, and we're only looking at replaced and new surface transfers to high priority watersheds. So we are not going to be able, in a lower priority watershed, and I'll talk about this later, when you have a replacement, say you have a parking lot and you replace it with an apartment building. Essentially, from a flow control standpoint, they're both hard surfaces, they're both impervious, they're about the same. So that watershed is seeing the same impact before and after the development. But the lift you would have to do under the permit to bring it back to forested, we're going to have happen over somewhere else. So, so that's what we're talking about in those developments are the transfer currency that we're working with. It's important that municipalities continue to take responsibility for the facilities that are used in the trading, the stormwater facilities that we're giving credit for in these high priority watersheds. And we have to have those facilities online and operational prior to being able to credit it where the development's occurring. I hit this one already. When the parking lot to apartment complex, there isn't really a change. But if it was half parking lot, half landscaping, you changed it to all parking lot, we want it to look like what it was immediately prior to your development. And so you'll have to do a little bit on your site, but certainly not the full lift Sears parking lot style vault on your site. You can do just a little bit there and then transfer the rest. Okay, and this is the other important part. We have to make sure that all three of these are basically accounting. So make sure that you're tracking where the projects are happening, where you're taking out of the facility, and then you report it into Ecology. And you have to make sure also to have good fiscal management. We just have a statement. Don't mix this with other accounts. This has to be dedicated to this stormwater transfer. So many words that I'm not even going to cover it. So I just want to bring this up. We did make a modification. Redmond was the pilot that they came in with this watershed plan. We went out with an idea of trying to trade all the minimum requirements we could. We had a lot of complications with treatment and low impact development, and we decided to put out the guidance for flow control only, because that is the easiest thing, the most clear transfer of it is impervious or it is not impervious. It's really straightforward. And that is the biggest lift, and the biggest feedback we've gotten from permittees is that that is a huge lift. And so this is the focus of what we're talking about is flow control. Prioritization, I think that Andy did a good job of talking a little bit about that, and I won't dwell on it. But it's, again, we're looking for the environmental lift and making sure we use the data that's out there to help us talk about it. And sometimes you have to collect additional data, but I really don't want jurisdictions to sell themselves short on what information they're already rich with, and I want them to think about that first. And then once we've established the prioritization, Ecology will be along for the ride and be like, hey, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's good science. It's defensible. We can move forward with that. So what are these ones I'm talking about, these high value and the high lift? It's not necessarily the pristine, and it's not necessarily the impacted. Every jurisdiction is going to be a little different, but typically you'd expect it to be those with low to moderate impairment, where we can raise it from fair to good is some of the BI talk we talk about. And we want to make sure you pick watersheds that you have an influence over. If you just have a little corner, it's not likely you're going to make an impact to the whole watershed. So that kind of makes sense. And if there are other things going on, like a salmon rehabilitation program, if you can coordinate that, that is great. Okay, so instead of hand puppets, I'm going to try now with sketching drawings, just to explain how this works. So the pink line is the jurisdiction, and those are the streams that are in it, the pink dash line around it. And they go through and they do a delineation and figure out which watersheds they have the most influence over, and these are basically the ones that they've got. The green ones are the ones that are higher priority, the yellows are the lower. Okay, they figured out that Creek B is moderate. The areas going to Creek B, it's the one closest to me over here. That one, it's less developed, and so it still has a good shot of being raised up, but it's starting to see some impairments. That's going to be the higher priority. This area over here, let's say it's fairly dense. It just doesn't have the same opportunities as this has of land that's going to develop, and you can make differences. You have opportunities to put retrofits in there, and there's space to put them in. So those are all good things for the green basins, things that might make it more desirable. So what's going to happen effectively is a project will happen here in the yellow area, and rather than do all of the work there, they're going to get the credit out of this regional facility that's in the green. And you'll have built that regional facility to serve, say that serves that whole basin. Let's just be optimistic that you've got this fantastic super pond here, and it's going to serve that whole area. And so then how do we get credit for that? So this is a little bit of what I was doing with hand puppets earlier, that we have this existing site that's half paved and half lawn, all right? We're now reducing that to just a little bit of lawn, and then we're going to build this multifamily thing on top of it. So this is the default is we're going to have this huge vault that we have to deal with instead of maybe a little something to, we've got 0.4 acres there if you're doing the math, where we've changed the impervious. We just have a little bit more. So we just have to take care of that last little bit in something on site, but it's much less than doing this whole thing that would possibly take up a lot of money and maybe some real estate that you're going to have to chew up to put in a facility. And effectively, so that site that was developing is over here, and then here's a close-up of that green basin. You can awe at my artistic abilities. So it turns out that these 4 houses have about the impervious surface that development had, and so we take that credit out of this regional facility. This regional facility is sized for everything that's contributing to it. We have a bunch of houses, a bunch of roads, and so it does all of it. So we can just tick off that those 4 are now, that capacity is used up out of this facility. So all these other houses are left, so we can have that amount of impervious develop over in this area, and we can still trade out. Monitoring, I am not a monitoring expert, so I won't get into too many details about that, but we do want an earnest effort and demonstration that you're trying to make some lifts. We want to see how your system's progressing, but we do have an understanding that the indicators aren't always blaring at you and obvious, and we understand that, and a reasonable monitoring effort is what we're expecting. So here is the accounting part and what we can use in the accounting. We're talking only about flow control, so these are the typical facilities you'll see. Everyone knows and loves detention, retention, dispersion, permeable pavement, bioretention, reforestation. So reforestation is an interesting one. If you're going to, it's more than depaving, but if you're somehow able to get an area and put it back to forest, we give you credit for doing that. I don't see people jumping up for that a lot. That's a pretty challenging one, but we wanted to provide the opportunity anyway. The currency again is the land type. Okay, so we're just basically talking about whether it's impervious, or is it lawn and landscape, or is it forested. So you trade like for like. I talked about the impervious in my example, but we also can trade for lawn and landscape areas. We want to track it about to the 10th of an acre, and we have to do the accounting at each step of the way. On the site, when the application occurs, when the development occurs, they have to report it to the municipality. The municipality needs to look at their regional facility, make sure they have the space for this, and then all of that is tracked back and reported to Ecology in their annual reports. So where is this guidance now besides on your desk? I did talk about that a little bit. The guidance is currently ready to go. If anyone would like to use it, it can be used. Even though we call it draft, all of this will be a framework for Ecology to work with you on it. Every jurisdiction is going to be a little different. So I think we did a good job of putting down the principles that everyone needs to follow. Building Cities in the Rain helped it out. Redmond's got a good boilerplate, some things people go off of. But we always recognize that each jurisdiction has its own challenges, gains, and abilities. And if you are interested in this, you can talk to me, or your permit manager is probably the best person to talk to. We've had a couple of inquiries here and there, but so far there aren't any on the front burners. So where is it heading? And Andy talked a little bit about this too. So we've got a new permit coming out, you may have heard. It's going to be out in 2019. It's a little ways away. But we are currently in the authoring phase. We're starting to write stuff. And as part of this permit cycle, we're looking at the bigger picture of how are we going to have a bigger planning aspect. And the Stormwater Control Transfer Program is one example of how we're planning ahead. But that's really what's driving this watershed approach that we are putting in this next permit. I touched briefly on the whole, we got here and there was a lawsuit that was along the way that helped us. And this is also furthering of that, as they said to us, that there was agreement that the site and subdivision scale, just doing everything site by site, is not going to bring us to where we need to be, and we need to have a wider vision. And Ecology's been charged to make sure that we include that in the permits. So everyone loves to read more documents and comment, and I gave you lots of time. You have all the way till Friday, I think it is, to the 2nd. But it was out in December. I don't know if you guys had Christmas or anything, but come on. No. And this is, I wanted to point out also, it's not the last, it's not the last at bat, but we wanted to provide this framework, and I didn't want to take the time to talk about this too much in our draft permit. We wanted to go out to the public and get as much input as we can to shape how this is going to work for you guys. What is it that works for you? We've heard some good comments already, and it's not too late to give some more input at this stage. If you've been thinking about it, please do. I promise I read them, every single one. And we sort them. We get a lot from your comments. We had an open session in December, and that already helped us. So I really am appreciative of the municipal community. They provide such great feedback, and thanks so much.